Well, they finally did it. They blew it up. Damn them all to hell, etc. Welcome once again to Every Movie Ever, the show where we try to review every movie ever made. I am in an apocalypse that has been brought forth by apes dominating mankind beneath the Planet of the Apes. A movie that they could not convince Charlton Heston to be in. This one is a disappointment. I am only going to give it 2 stars.
We have taken over your picture box.
And now, the conclusion.
Now, right now, we've got a whole new cycle of ape movies going on in the theaters. People are loving them. I'm loving them. I'll be talking about them in a minute. To be honest with you, I'm only going to talk about the first 2. I know what you're saying. You're saying, hey, hasn't the third Apes movie been in theaters for a little bit? And shouldn't a guy who's trying to review every movie ever go to the trouble of putting the most recent ape movie in his episode where he's talking about the 8 movies? Yeah, I should have, but you know what? Didn't get around to seeing it. But you know what I bet you forgot about? That Tim Burton made a Planet of the Apes movie in the early 2000s. And it stars Mark Wahlberg. And it stinks. I was real interested to rewatch this one, to give it a reappraisal, especially now that we have some more ape movies that really sort of fit into the ape mold. I was hopeful that I would be able to be more forgiving of this particular ape movie. It does not work. This is a real stinker of a movie. It somehow manages to avoid ever having any valid or interesting social commentary. It also manages to avoid having any interesting action or intrigue or thrilling sequences in it. Where we have to buy that early career Mark Wahlberg is an astronaut. The only good thing about it is Paul Giamatti plays an ape, and his ape is real Paul Giamatti in the best possible way. But otherwise, this thing's a real stinker, and it has a nonsensical twist ending featuring an ape statue of Abraham Lincoln that I could not explain to you if I tried. I think I can only... 2 stars. Let's give it 2 stars. So now we've got new ape movies. The first of these was Rise of the Planet of the Apes. These are the ones where all the apes are motion captured dudes. And you got Andy Serkis from Lord of the Rings. I don't know why I'm doing this. I guess this is an ape. You got Andy Serkis from Lord of the Rings is Caesar. You see what I'm saying about Conquest? He's Caesar, and he's a chimp that gets injected up with like some anti-Alzheimer's stuff or whatever, and becomes smart. And one thing leads to another. Ape revolution. James Franco's in this movie. Also, John Lithgow. You know what? It's a movie that when it came out, seemed like it would probably be pretty good, but kind of silly. And let's be honest, an apes movie should be a little bit silly. You take this stuff too seriously, it's going to fall apart. This is a really good movie. It's a really good movie with a lot of heart in it, a lot of emotion. You really feel for these apes. They've got that motion capture CG stuff down well enough that you're really pulling and rooting for these apes. There is a spectacular action sequence on the Golden Gate Bridge at the end of this thing that you've got to see. Really, truly enjoyed this one. 4 stars. Now, the next one then is Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. I didn't like it quite as much. It is good. You've got even more apes. They're all, great acting, great ape acting. This time, again, if Rise of the Planet of the Apes is sort of a remake of Conquest, this is sort of a remake of Battle, where you have the burgeoning ape civilization fighting the dwindling humans, this time being led by Gary Oldman, who does a standard Gary Oldman kind of bad guy Gary Oldman performance. It's a pretty good movie. Outside of Gary Oldman, you don't get a lot. Like Kerry Russell is in this. Listen though, it's a good movie. It's a good action movie. It's a lot of fun. It is not quite up to the heights of Rise, but it's worth seeing. 3.5 stars. All right, let's start distancing ourselves from our new ape overlords here a little bit. I want to talk to you about The Mermaid. Now, Mermaid, let's be honest, only half aminal, but I think we can make an exception. I really liked this movie. This is a fun movie. I've been really wanting to see it. It is a movie from China. It was directed by the guy who directed like Stephen Chow, I think his name is. I should research this stuff before I get up here, but there you go. This is the guy who directed Shaolin Soccer. He directed Kung Fu Hustle. He directed a movie a couple of years ago called Journey into the West that I liked a lot. So when I heard that he was doing kind of a goofy romantic comedy about a mermaid, I was all excited for it. And while it doesn't quite reach the heights of some of his other movies, it's a super solidly entertaining movie. It is also apparently the top grossing movie of all time in China. So if you have any interest in understanding like the sort of movie that the Chinese go to see, you should see this movie because it was a huge hit there. This one is about a lady mermaid who she is part of like a group of like, you know, the last dozen or so mermaids. And so she decides to impersonate a human by putting on a long skirt and shoving sneakers over her fins and go out into the human world and seduce a billionaire to stop him from polluting the ocean. It's a really fun movie. There's another guy in this movie who's, who's kind of the leader of the mermaids. He's an octopus. And there is this great scene about halfway through the movie wherein the lady mermaid and the millionaire are out to dinner. They go to a sushi bar. The octopus has gone to the sushi bar to keep an eye on them. He decided to pose as the chef when one of his tentacles pokes out and the millionaire asks him to fry up the tentacle. So we have this scene where the octopus guy is literally like cutting off and dicing up his own tentacles. It's really gross and weird, which is kind of this movie in a nutshell. The end gets oddly violent. I'm going to tell you that right now. And the environmental allegory part of it is a little bit heavy-handed sometimes. But it is overall a super fun movie that if you have any interest in seeing a popular, foreign movie, you should absolutely see. I'm a little in between 3 and 3.5 on this one. I think I'm going to have to go ahead and give it 3 stars. Let's give it 3 stars. You guys know what a great, animals attacking movie is? It's Jaws. And you know what a great scene in Jaws is? It's that scene where they're sitting around where they're on the Orca, the boat, and they're sitting around the table and they're telling stories, and Quint tells the story about how he was in the Navy and he was on board the Indianapolis, which is the ship that delivered the atomic bomb for the bombing. It delivered it to like the air base for the bombing of Hiroshima. He was on the ship and the ship got torpedoed and went down, and the crew spent a couple of nights in the ocean being picked off by sharks. It's a great monologue and a great scene. And I've always felt like they should do a Jaws sequel about that would be a terrific movie. Well, somebody decided that they were going to skirt the Jaws sequel part of it and just make a movie about the Indianapolis. They called it USS Indianapolis, Men of Courage. They convinced Nick Cage to be in it for upwards of 15 minutes. It is awful. This movie could not have ended up worse. It is complete, it's confusing, it is unengaging, it is poorly acted. There's no excitement here. It's just confusion. It's like a worse version of 1941. I did not enjoy it. It's really, really bad. And the fact that they made such a bad movie out of such a promising premise is even more disappointing. It has all of the charm and the shine of a particularly bad sci-fi original movie, but this one's about, history. Half a star. Finally got around to seeing Pet Sematary, folks. Had never seen Pet Sematary, which, as a kid who grew up in the 80s, that seems like, and a horror fan, seems like a movie I should have seen by now. Well, I finally saw it. I didn't like it. I thought it was real stupid. I didn't think it was particularly scary. I thought it was one of those movies, it's super predictable, which in part might just be because of its fame. But also it's one of those movies that depends on all of the characters acting like huge idiots. The premise is that there's an Indian burial ground, and if you bury something in it, it'll come back to life. But the cost for bringing something back to life is it comes back to life super evil. So they bury a cat in it, and the cat comes back super evil. So then the main couple, who's the stars of the movie, their little boy gets run over by a truck. Now, the cat had gotten driven over by a truck. From the very first scene, we have had hammered home again and again that this house that they live in, have just moved into, is on a street that semis go whipping down. Get a fence. Like, this could have been avoided so easily, and it is not. So the kid gets run over by a truck, and even though the cat came back evil, and even though they've been warned repeatedly by Herman Munster, yeah, for real, that stuff that comes back from the cemetery comes back evil, they still bury their son in it, and guess what? He comes back as a murderous little boy. Which would almost be great, except that that's like the very end of the movie. Like the last 15 minutes are killer kid. I wish it had been more of the movie. Then the wife gets killed, and the dumb husband decides he's going to bury her too, which really is the only good part of the movie, is then the wife comes back to murder him as the very end part of the movie. I'm sorry I spoiled it. I'm not really. I liked that a little bit. I wish that those... He's so dumb. 2 stars. I don't know why you guys like this. 2 stars. Let's talk Piranha 3D. This came out a few years ago. One of the few 3D movies that I will endorse. I mostly think 3D is bogus, but this was a real dumb, exploitive horror comedy movie that really took advantage of its 3D trappings. It assembled a pretty good cast of weird, like, they did have Richard Dreyfuss and Christopher Lloyd in it, but also Elizabeth Shue and Adam Scott and Ving Rhames and Jerry O'Connell, all putting in, you know, fun performances in a movie that everybody knows is a total exploitation flick. It's a fun time at the movies, pretty gory sometimes. There's a great part where this movie's about monster piranhas. And the monster piranhas attack like a Spring Break MTV kind of thing and kill a bunch of people in the water. And at one point, Ving Rhames rips off an outboard motor and he's using it to chop up piranhas in the water. Blood's flying everywhere. So if that sounds like the kind of movie you would enjoy, you will enjoy Piranha 3D. I know I did. 3 stars. When I was a kid, we had a video of a Paddington Bear. I think they were cartoons or some sort of weird stop motion or something. And I never really got it. I never really got the appeal of Paddington Bear. I know he's a big deal in England. And I get it. You know, he's a bear in an overcoat. That's sort of cute. Well, a couple of years ago, they put out a Paddington Bear movie. Now, if you'll recall my review of Scooby-Doo from a few minutes ago, revivals of kids' properties that are shot live action with a CG animal in them are not my favorite. But here's what you can do to get me to check out such a movie. 1, you can put the dad from Downton Abbey in it. I'm a big Downton Abbey fan. Hugh Bonneville's his name. 2, you can put Nicole Kidman in it. And folks, I love me some Nicole Kidman. And she was wearing some spectacular outfits in this thing. She's the bad guy, so she gets to wear like a lot of like real, like kind of tight but severe sort of, you know, cool villain outfits. You know, and they're never, you know, real exploitive outfits. They're just real cool, kind of Bob Mackie looking numbers. She's a lot of fun in this. This movie is a lot of fun. I didn't expect to like it that much. I liked it quite a bit. It's a real sweet movie. It's eccentric in all the right places. What they do with the talking bear is always fun. Paddington is a kind of character whose mistakes sort of build upon themselves. So like dropping the soap ends with a bathroom filled with water and water pouring down the stairs and stuff. Everybody in this movie is game. It's a super, super fun movie, especially as a family movie. I would recommend seeing it. You had better be comfortable watching British things, because this movie is British as all get out. So if you don't like yourself a good Sunday night in PBS, this probably isn't the movie for you. But that does mean it was the movie for me. There's a sequel coming out. I'm looking forward to it. 3 stars. So, earlier we were talking about I was checking out some movies that I had never gotten around to seeing. I thought I would, and like with Planet of the Apes, it was time to maybe reappraise a movie. For some reason, I thought it would be a good idea to revisit The Flintstones, the Steven Spielberg produced, John Goodman, Rick Moranis Flintstones movie. It wasn't that bad. Like, it's pretty bad. Like, it's not good. But again, as I said with the Scooby-Doo thing, what saves this movie, outside of, honestly, the production design's pretty good. Like, if you're going to do a Flintstones movie as a live action thing, you could do a lot worse than how they made this look and how the dinosaurs looked and the sets looked and everything. And you could also do a lot worse than the cast. It's a really good cast. John Goodman and Rick Moranis really inhabit their roles in a great way. And the supporting cast is all real good too. The problem with this movie is the plot. It's one of those movies that they made in the 90s where they took like a perfectly good comedy movie and they shoved this really involved espionage plot into it. So Kyle MacLachlan of Twin Peaks has gotten a job at Slate & Company, and he is involved in some elaborate embezzling scam, and he intends to use Fred as a fall guy after Fred gets promoted, but only because Barney cheated on a test to make Fred look good. And then Fred gets rich, and then the richness gets in between the friends. It's so complicated, and it doesn't need to be. It would have been a much better and more enjoyable movie if it had a plot more in the line of the TV show than, again, this super complicated thing that involves, double crosses and I don't know. That said, again, the cast does elevate it enough that I feel safe giving it 2.5 stars. So we talked about a Jaws ripoff movie. We talked about a 3D movie. Let's talk Jaws 3D. I really like Jaws 3D. You guys, this is the one where they open like SeaWorld but with sharks in it. So in a lot of ways, it's like Jurassic World but with sharks. It's dumb. There's no saying it isn't dumb. And there's no saying it's even a little bit of what Jaws is. It is not. But it's one of those so bad it's good movies. It's entertaining. It's got some good kills in it. The SeaWorld part of it is really goofy. Leah Thompson is in it. I liked it a fair amount. I absolutely want to see it again sometime. And I would love the opportunity to see it in 3D because I'm sure that would take it up just that extra little notch. Anyway, I liked it a good amount. I understand if you didn't. It is, to my mind, the best of the Jaws sequels by a lot. 2.5 stars. Another movie I revisited recently, I had seen, so there's a movie called Project X, which is a movie about Matthew Broderick in a chimp. And part of me was convinced that I had dreamed this movie, that this movie did not actually exist, that it was something I had made up. Turns out it's a real movie. Matthew Broderick is in the Air Force. He's a jerk, so he gets demoted to having to work in this chimp program where they're training chimps how to fly planes for some reason. And so, so Matthew comes in, he becomes friends with the chimps. One of the chimps had been taught sign language and, in kind of a Coco the gorilla sort of a sense. And, I'm going to go back a little bit. One of the chimps had been taught sign language in kind of a Coco the gorilla style. I love Coco, but now is not the time to get into my Coco love. So anyway, Matthew Broderick befriends this chimp. Then he realizes that the government is killing the chimps, that part of their training is this whole like nuclear thing where they get exposed to radiation. So Matthew teams up with Helen Hunt, who had been the one to teach the chimp the sign language, and they save the chimps. And it's a fun movie that is, it's pretty saccharine, and it's more than a little cliche, but it pulled my heartstrings just right. It has an absolutely nuts in a good way kind of an ending. 3.5 stars. So the wife and I, we've been revisiting a lot of Disney stuff. We have fond memories of 101 Dalmatians. Hadn't seen it in a really long time. Decided to put it on. And let me tell you something about the old Disney animated classics. What's surprising about them is how little fat there is on them. Like, these movies are really lean. Like, they're exceptionally told. the storytelling is so tight. Like when it's like a movie like 101 Dalmatians, which I hadn't seen in such a long time, I expected to go into it and for there to be a bunch of scenes, like kind of superfluous scenes that I didn't remember because they weren't memorable. But those don't exist. Like these movies are just what you remember. They're so tightly and efficiently told with such great imagination. I was also surprised by how abstract 101 Dalmatians is. I forgot that or never realized, because I'm sure I was pretty young last time I saw it, how artistic the backgrounds are. That they, usually you watch a Disney movie and the backgrounds are these fully rendered marvels, but here they went with kind of an abstract look that is really interesting and really cool. It's a really fun movie. You know the story. You know about the Dalmatians. It's an absolutely irresistible movie featuring one of Disney's most iconic villains. There's not a lot bad you can say about it. Maybe it could stand to be maybe just a touch meatier, but it's a great movie, 4.5 stars. What isn't a great movie is the 90s 101 Dalmatians. Now, Disney's currently locked into this cycle where they're remaking a bunch of their animated classics as live action. But what people tend to forget is they did this before in the 90s, although much less successfully. They made a version of 101 Dalmatians. The most notable thing that you can say about it is that it starred Glenn Close as Cruella de Vil. And yeah, and her performance is pretty fun. The rest of the movie is a real head scratcher, though. That stars what's his name? I can't remember his name right now. Nor can I come up with anything that I can tell you that he was in. So it stars that guy, right? It's not a very good movie. It is, as that'll tell you, Jeff Daniels. It stars Jeff Daniels of Dumb and Dumber is the star of this movie. And it's not very good. It's just not. It doesn't work. And when I was just talking about the animated version, I was talking about how lean and efficient that movie is. This one is the opposite. There is so much, excess on this movie. And it makes a mistake, I think, by shifting the perspective from the dogs to the humans. The humans are not the interesting part of this movie, and it's not a lot of fun to spend so much time with them. Again, Glenn Close's performance raises it a little bit, but overall it is not great. 2 stars. Like I said, I know that Zira and Cornelius were able to get off of this Planet of the Apes by hopping a spaceship. So I can only hope there's a third one of those things around here somewhere. I'm going to go look, and hopefully I'm off this, ape dystopia by the next time I see you, and we can try once again to review every movie ever made. Good night.